I'm delighted to say Catherine Murphy of ABC News in Australia is with us this morning. Catherine, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Ger. How are you?
Well, we are very excited about what's going on your doorstep at the moment. What a story. What a global shit show, if everybody will pardon my French. And every passing hour seems to bring new, fresh stuff, where overnight, for Irish people waking up, all day for you today, Novak Djokovic has issued a statement which seems to implicate him in falsifying documents applying for his immigration visa.
It does, Ger. This story is like nothing I've ever seen before. I can tell you, I got back from Cavan over the weekend. There was no time for jet lag. It was straight into this Novak Djokovic story. So the latest, as you said, he's put up a very detailed Instagram post. Now, this is the first time he's spoken or posted on social media since he was released from detention in an immigration hotel in Melbourne. Just words I never thought I'd say. As you say, he has implicated himself a bit because there were questions around the timing of the positive PCR test, which he received in December, which was the sole grounds for his medical exemption. The reason there were questions around it, as you know, is because he was photographed at an event with kids a day later. Then a day after that, he was at a photo shoot with a French newspaper, L'Equipe, and he did an interview masked and socially distanced, but took the mask off for photographs. Now, he's now admitted that he was at a basketball match in Serbia where there were COVID-19 cases. He was told he may be a contact. He was negative in rapid antigen tests, but did a PCR. On the morning of that event that we saw him photographed with young kids at a sports event, he said he had a rapid antigen test that was negative, but then his PCR came back positive. But wait for it, he admits that he decided to go and do an interview with L'Equipe. He didn't want to let the journalist down. Now, that made me laugh a little bit. Like, you know, that we often get let down, right? By interviews.
Particularly by big names, yes.
By big names, and you know how hard they are to get, and you're negotiating with media managers, their agents, you finally get them. They don't turn up. It's happened to all of us. I've been stood up by the best of them. Raphael Nadal waited for him in a corridor for 4 hours. In fairness to him, he was injured. Not his fault. He's such a polite gentleman. But we've all been stood up. But he insists he didn't want to let the journalist down. So in order to not let the journalist down, he thought he would turn up to an interview with COVID-19. And it's over to you, Ger, about would you feel let down with an interviewee turning up with COVID-19?
I'm delighted. Come on in, Novak. Smear me with your germs. Thank you very much. Just cough this direction, please.
I almost, you know what? It takes so much work to set up those interviews. I don't know. I'd almost back my booster in, Ger. But anyway, that's not the point. So he's turned up because he didn't want to let someone down. This statement comes, Ger, at a really pivotal time where the Home Affairs Minister in Australia still has the power, or the Immigration Minister rather, still has the power to cancel his visa. That process, that decision is still being made. And if you believe reports in the Age newspaper today, and they've been very accurate so far on their reporting, it's still an ongoing decision and they won't be rushed. They don't care that the Australian Open draw is due to happen tomorrow.
It does feel like, just from this side of the world, right? It felt like the court decision was actually, if the government wanted it, it was a nice way out, because they could have said, okay, look, we tried our best. We tried to stop him from coming in. The courts have said we're not allowed, and he gets to play and everybody pays attention. But the trouble is that the story that he's had and the press conference that they gave, the family gave, was so chaotic, and there are so many holes in the story that you can easily start to unravel it. Even the QR code that went public, that initially was the QR code for what looked like a negative test, and then the fact that it's a positive test. And now he really needed this positive test to get the medical exemption, and there's even talk about perhaps he'd missed the deadline for the medical exemption, so they've grandfathered that in. So there's so many doubts about it that it feels like now the Australian government might actually be pressurised into saying, well, I'm sorry, mate, you lied in your documents. We can't be having that.
I do not know, Ger, which way this is going to go. I feel like, so he did a very smart thing, I thought, from a PR point of view. As soon as he got out of detention, he went straight to centre court for a training session, straight to Rod Laver Arena. He's pictured there with his team. He's trained there again since then. Yesterday, it was a behind closed doors session. The only footage that we got in our newsroom was from the helicopter, the news helicopter that was sent up. That's how big a story this is. You're talking about a tennis player is going to training. We send up the helicopter to get the shots of him at training. That's how big this is. Today, he trained again, but it was an open training session. So the media were allowed in today. That was a big change from yesterday. So he's been training a lot. He's been at the courts. He's been on site at the Australian Open, which is ready to go. I just find it hard to envisage a situation, but I've been so surprised at every twist and turn of this, Ger, so I'm absolutely not ruling it out. But I'd be very surprised if he was then to end up being removed from that court again. But who knows?
It's a good point. It's a pretty smart thing to do. Get him in there straight away, and then they can't take him out. Like you mentioned, sending the helicopter up, it like has flashbacks to the OJ car chase. Catherine, like what has this been like as a journalist working on this? That this is clearly going to be one of the biggest stories of your career, I suspect, and of covering sport in Australia ever.
It's been just surreal, honestly, because coming back to Australia, usually I'm most worried about after Christmas at home, and the best time at home. My biggest concerns are, how hot is it going to be? You know, how am I going to handle going straight to the tennis court from, you know, being back home? And just to be on a live link, watching a federal court hearing as a sports reporter, instead of watching the tennis. And there's some great tennis on at the moment. We've had Raphael Nadal. He's won a title this week. Ash Barty, the Australian world #1. Usually there'd be so much hype about her. She's won a title this week. But the magnitude of this story and the number of elements in the story is it's almost overwhelming. You know, every piece of this story is a huge story, if I'm making sense. And it's changing so rapidly, and it is dominating every channel, every newspaper. It is just, it's hard to believe. At times, I'm sitting over here and I'm in disbelief at what's happened.
From being around the city then, and I guess maybe seeing as much as you can the interactions between Australians on the ground over there, how divisive has this story been?
Well, Owen, it's surprising from the point of view that when it was first announced that he would get a medical exemption, as we know, there was huge anger about that, because this has been a saga for months in Australia between the federal government of Australia and the state government here in Victoria. The state government have been really clear on the fact that they didn't want anyone who wasn't vaccinated coming into Victoria and Melbourne to play in the Australian Open. The federal government said all along it was a matter for the Victorian state government. Then when an independent body of experts gave him this exemption, it appeared that he was coming in despite the Victorian government not wanting him here. And it looked as though the federal government were okay with that. And then when he's up in the air, everything changed. What really changed public opinion from the sheer anger that he was going to be able to come into Australia, because as you'll know, Melbourne has gone through the longest lockdown in the world. People are angry generally. They didn't want him coming in when there are very strict vaccine mandates here. But that anger quickly turned to something else when word came out that he was detained in an immigration hotel after he appeared to, at least on the surface, from a border security, border force point of view, fill out all the right documents. Would you believe there was sympathy? there's been a part of this week, and honestly, the days are blurring into one, where I saw sympathy for him. Now, I've seen that feeling in the community change again today, Owen, because we've had the revelation that yes, that positive PCR test in December was followed by movement in the community. Okay, even if he says he didn't know when he was at that public event, he did know at the photo shoot and the interview. So again, public opinion is changing, and I just don't know what's going to happen next.
What about the actual tennis? You mentioned Ash Barty. Naomi Osaka, I think, is back. We had Emma Raducanu getting absolutely annihilated yesterday, 6-0, 6-1. It looks like we're all set for one of the truly great women's Australian Opens anyway.
That's exactly right, Ger. And honestly, I wrote a piece today for ABC, which is coming out at the weekend, about, the stories we should be talking about. There are so many incredible storylines. And let's actually start with Novak Djokovic, what we would have been talking about if we weren't talking about his visa. Of course, we know he's going for title 21. He pretty much owns Melbourne Park. It will be his 10th Australian Open. But just 4 months ago, remember those images of him sobbing under a towel in the third set of his straight sets defeat to Daniil Medvedev at the US Open? That became one of the really enduring images of the season, because we saw that side to him. We saw a vulnerable side to him, and he garnered a lot of support from that. Meanwhile, Daniil Medvedev, the Russian, he beats this iconic player, one of the holy trinity of tennis. He denies him a slice of history. And what does he do? The dead fish, FIFA celebration, the video game. Now, you guys probably know what that is, but please know that sports reporters like me didn't even know what that celebration was. And I'm tipping the big three in their 30s, and now Roger he's 40. He wouldn't have known either. So that's a whole other storyline. There's Raphael Nadal, who's also going for 21. If he wins the Australian Open, and that's a big if, he's coming back from a foot injury, he's 35, you would think he is in a great position to go back to the French Open, which he lost to Novak Djokovic last year, and win that one. He could be up on 22. He could be 2 Grand Slams ahead in the GOAT race. And then, as you say, there's the women's event. Ash Barty, the world number one, she achieved her childhood dream, winning Wimbledon. Usually on any other time in an alternate universe, that's all we'd be talking about here in Melbourne. The world number one's back. She's won Wimbledon. She's won the Adelaide International this week. She's in red hot form. There's Naomi Osaka. What a story she is. She was one of the biggest, not even tennis stories, biggest sports stories of last year, when she withdrew from media, withdrew from the French Open, and then revealed her struggles with mental health issues. She had to withdraw from Wimbledon. She played the Olympics. And then in the US Open, after that third round defeat to Leylah Fernandez, was in tears again, and revealing that when she won a tennis match, she was just relieved. And when she lost, she was really sad. There was no happiness for her associated with tennis anymore. She's making her comeback at the Australian Open after a break. These are all huge stories that we would be talking about. And as you said, Emma Raducanu, who had a big reality check last night. She only won one game in that match, but she took it really well. She laughed. She didn't want the double bagel. It's going to be a journey for her. I hope the media give her time to develop. She's so young. She's done amazing things, but she's really so new to the tennis tour.
What about Nick Kyrgios? He's tested positive. Is he going to be available to play? Do we know what his vaccination status is, and is he going to be recovered in time?
Well, actually, I just spoke to his manager today, Ger, and in good news, he is symptom-free at the moment. He has been the entire time since he tested positive. He is double vaccinated. He is symptom-free. He's desperate to play at the Australian Open, and I really hope he does. He is box office. So when Nick Kyrgios plays at the Australian Open, he chooses to play at this court that's gone through many name changes. It's called John Cain Arena right now. It was Melbourne Arena. when he plays there, it's not the top court, it's not centre court, it's not Margaret Court Arena. It's a court that you can go to, Ger, on a $50 ground pass. So you can just wander in. Now, when he's playing, there are queues to see him. And watching Nick Kyrgios in that stadium is like no other tennis experience in the world. I've been to a match there, I think it would have been 2 years ago, back in the good times, 2020, the Australian Open happened just before the world shut down. And I think he was playing the Russian Karen Khachanov. And the atmosphere in that stadium, it was like a nightclub. I've never witnessed anything like it. It's the best sports event I've ever been lucky enough to work at. And at the end of the match, so I was emceeing from the side, I was kind of in the corner with my mic, and I had a feeling it was going to kick off at the end. So I moved out courtside just to check on everyone, because you're supposed to announce the players off in their own time when they've packed their bags. And I'll never forget Karen Khachanov taking out his rackets again. And I'm thinking, the match is over. You've been beaten. And he just smashed every one of them courtside as Nick waited to do his post-match interview. And I mean, the music, people were hanging out of the rafters. So I hope Nick Kyrgios is back. Fingers crossed, he's symptom-free right now.
Right. Wow, that sounds amazing. Because
he's amazing. Honestly, I can't recommend.
I need to fess up here, Catherine. We've definitely had a debate over the years with Colin Buig, who's our resident tennis expert, about Kyrgios. I'd had enough of his childish antics, but you're turning me on. You're turning me around here. You're definitely. I'm like, okay, this sounds cool, and also he's really handled himself very well since the start of the pandemic. I'm coming around. I'm softening. I may well be clambering aboard the bandwagon.
I'd like to vouch for him a little bit more. Before the pandemic started in 2020, I remember that was a really tough build up to the Australian Open, because the bushfires here in Australia, it was just devastating. It was so scary. And I was in Sydney working at the ATP Cup, where Australia was playing and Nick Kyrgios was playing for Australia. And I remember waking up in the hotel that morning and you could physically smell smoke in the corridor. It was so upsetting, like, because you're going to a tennis match and you're thinking, I can smell smoke. Like, there are bigger things in the world. This feels wrong. And Nick Kyrgios was part of a huge drive to raise money for those affected by the bushfires. He really drove it. So even before the pandemic, I feel like he's the sort of guy that you would really like. Honestly, you would love his matches, You'd love them.
Like, just kind of like looking back at like his best returns in the slams, like he was 19 and 20 when he gets to his quarterfinals in Wimbledon and the Australian Open respectively. Like he's still only 26. I kind of had a thought in my head that he was a bit older than that at this point. Is there a sense that he can kind of recapture that teenage/early 20s form and kick on a little bit further, especially if...
Because he's been talking about retiring.
Like, that has been the thing, hasn't he? Yeah, stepping away from it. Like, I don't want to say has he kind of got a refocused attitude towards tennis, but you suspect that that's one of the challenges he has. But if he gets over that, the sky's the limit for this guy still.
The sky is the limit, Owen, but I'm not sure he wants it. This is such a complex conversation, and I'd love to bring a sports psychologist in on this. But Nick was really open last year. He said, I'm not Roger and Rafa. I'm not perfect. I can't work like them. It can't be my everyday living it and breathing it. I'm just not that person. I want to have fun. I just want to have fun. So maybe I'm not going to be that person that wins slams. And he's kind of got to that point where he's saying, take me or leave me. And he knows he's box office. He knows that people like me are dying to work at his next match because of what he brings to a court and the vibe he brings to a court. But it may be, Owen, that we may have to accept that that's what Nick is, that he's entertainment and he's not that. He's not striving for that. Now, that's hard to accept because every time I go to watch him practice, say, just to have a look at how he's going in practice, he oozes talent out of every pore in his body. Like, some players you watch practicing, it's like they bring such an effort. He just is, it comes so easy to him, and you want him to take that and you want him to use it, and you know that if he used it and he dedicated his life to it, like, Roger and Rafa and Novak that he could do it.
Yeah.
But maybe we have to accept that he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he needs to hang out with Ronnie O'Sullivan and see what turned Ronnie O'Sullivan back into the world champion after he lost his mojo. Catherine, I don't know if you've been keeping abreast of Owen's power rankings, but he humiliated Cavan by putting them on the third page yesterday, and then he himself was humiliated last night when Tyrone, the All-Ireland champions, were ritually humiliated by the Cavan footballers last night, which leads to Shane commenting on YouTube, can you ask Catherine, is it Cavan's year?
It is Cavan's year. I don't want to jinx them, Owen, but I think I'm so lucky that I didn't know you did that, Owen. Like, clearly, we've beaten the All-Ireland champions. Would I be here now if I knew Owen said that? We're okay with a huge apology, Owen. I'm sure you'll make it up to Cavan.
We all make mistakes.
Catherine, great stuff. Thanks a million. Great to talk to you.
Oh, lovely to talk to you, Ger and Eoin, anytime. Take care.
And a happy new year. Thanks a million.